लोकल के लिए वोकल बने। नव प्रवर्तक पोर्टल्स भारतीय इंजीनियरिंग द्वारा स्वदेश में ही निर्मित एवं संचालित हैं। आज ही अपना खुद का पोर्टल बुक करें।
Rivers are the most important surface freshwater resources in the world. They are vital for navigation, aquatic life, and sustenance of the civilizations. All the civilizations, since ancient times till date, have thrived along the major rivers of the world. The Ganga is not just a river, it is a lifeline for millions of people. It is deeply rooted in our culture and it is considered a holy river. A very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Dr. Venkatesh Datta. I am a faculty member at School for Environmental Sciences, Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar Central University, Lucknow, and I work on water resources management. My special interests are river systems and its connectivity with the landscape, that is all the water bodies, wetlands, ponds, and also I work on the connectivity of the river channel with the groundwater. So I hope you must be doing sound in this global pandemic. This is indeed a global crisis. And I must thank my university, especially my Vice Chancellor, to initiate this lecture series. We are also having our Silver Jubilee celebration. Our university is a public funded university. It's a central university and it is named after Dr. Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar, who was father of Indian Constitution. And our university has also entered in 25th year of its inception. So I am thankful to Dr. Govindji Pandey and Dr. Alka from Mass Communication Department for inviting me and giving a talk on a subject which is very close to my heart. Today I will be talking on restoration and rejuvenation of Ganga River. I will be also talking upon what is unique about Ganga. And what do we mean by Ganga itself? What is Gangattu? And what is the meaning of Aviral Dhara, Nirmal Dhara, geological entity, biological entity? So in next 40 minutes or 45 minutes, I will be giving you an overview of the river systems, especially how Ganga river came to assume a central position in the history of our civilization. Friends, we all know that major civilizations of this world thrived along the rivers. You can take the example, since ancient times till date, all the civilizations right from Indus to Tigris and Euphrates, what we have the two rivers and which supported Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Middle East. And the word Mesopotamia means land between two rivers. And those two rivers were Tigris and Euphrates. So similarly, Ganga, if you see Ganga and Yamuna Doab, the meeting of two rivers from Allahabad, that is from Haridwar to Allahabad, the entire Ganga plain is a Doab. It is made by two river systems or the tributaries of the Ganga and the Ganga itself. Similarly, you take the example of River Nile in Egypt, where we have documented history of about 3100 BC. We also have Indus River, what we have the larger part, the entire part of India and the western South Asia, where we have evidence of life and the colony about 2600 BC. Similarly, China thrived along the Yellow River, and you have Danube River in Europe, which is also life sustaining to which is giving nurturing the entire civilization which thrived in Europe and nearby areas. But there is a development paradox. When we look at a river just like a channel and we don't understand the connections of a river with the landscape, then we make a mistake. You know, everything is now built landscape. Although when we talk in urban context, we talk about the built landscape, and we forget the connections, the ecosystem, the ecological well-being, and the entire carrying capacity of the natural environment. And that's why I talk about this development paradox, that in built environment, what do we want from a river? We always want from a river. We never say what river wants from us. What is the expectation of a river? And with so many pressure, with so many impact, with so many response, we cannot maintain the complete natural serene environment. So the development paradox is that we cannot maintain a complete natural environment with so many pressure, impact, response happening in a river basin. Now I always tell that if you want to understand about a city or about a watershed or about a town, go and look at its river. A river is a mirror of what is happening in the catchment. It can provide you the image of the city. It can provide you what is happening on the land. For example, take Yamuna in Delhi, what we have done to this river. If you see the biological oxygen demand, the BOD load, it's so high, it is almost like a drain. What we have done to our Gomti river, which is also tributary of the Ganges. What we have done to Hindon, and if you want to understand Ghaziabad, just look at Hindon. If you want to understand Meerut, look at Kali river. If you want to understand Ramganga, look at what is happening in Bareilly. So my assumption is that we are dehydrating the ecosystem to hydrate our economy. That means we take so much of goods and services from the ecosystem, but we never give it back. So why Ganga is so important? Why we talk about the ecosystem management? First of all, I'd give you one glimpse of natural heritage. We have built heritage like Taj Mahal, Red Fort, but we never talk about the natural heritage. And rivers are part of our natural heritage. They have not been made by human agencies. They are not human artifacts. And most of the landscapes, most of the landforms, the ecosystem that we see around the river, they have taken lakhs of years to evolve, thousands and thousands of years, cyclic flood response, drought cycle, and sedimentation. So whatever land, the ecosystem and the landscape that we see, it is a result of natural processes. And thirdly, rivers are one of the most productive ecosystem of the freshwater. They produce and preserve freshwater wildlife. And most important point that we always forget, that river is connected to groundwater in a very intimate way. It is the groundwater that supports river in the lean seasons. You know, we have snow melt from the Himalayan glaciers, we have rainfall, but look what is happening in the extreme summer to those rivers which are not fed by snow melt, such as the tributaries of Yamuna, Ken, Betwa, Chambal, and even Gomti. They are all plain fed rivers. They do not get any drop of water from the snow melt. So in the summer season, when there is no rain, the river is still perennial, there is still water. That means it is groundwater which supports rivers in the lean season. And the last point that I want to highlight, that is the central message that I want to give in my lecture. A healthy river would depend upon its healthy tributaries. River is not just a main channel. There are many tributaries, smaller channels, rivers, which feed into the main stream of the Ganga river, and they are equally important. Now, I have evolved a concept which I call it Panchamrit, the 5 things to restore in a river, what we basically look from the restoration angle. First of all, we want our rivers to be clean. The water quality should be clean, so that you can take bath, you can use it for drinking purposes, the wildlife can survive, and so on. Second, we want to maintain the healthy flow regime. The river must flow. And in Sanskrit, we say, Nadyah Begen Shuddhyati. It is the flow of the river that cleanses it. So we want a healthy flow regime in our river. And third, we want to also support the valued biota, the entire fish population, turtles and the crocodiles and the dolphins, all the rare and the valued biota we want to preserve in our rivers. What else we want? We also want connected vegetation. That is, if there's a river, we also want there should be a healthy riparian vegetation, or the corridor of the river should be green. It should not be like concrete wall around the river. It's a very ugly sight. When you go and look at a river, you also look the surroundings, the catchment, the floodplains, and the entire fluvial ecosystem is very important. So we say that we must maintain the healthy vegetation. And fourthly, which is very important, we want to connect the channel with the landscape. I always highlight in my presentation that still you are focusing on the main Ganga river, but you are forgetting the countless number of water bodies. You must have heard a song, ताल मिले नदी के जल में, नदी मिले सागर में, सागर मिले कौन से जल में कोई जाने ना. So the beginning starts from Tal, the wetlands, the ponds, and they meet the smaller channels, and the smaller channels becomes the bigger streams, and they go and ultimately merge into the ocean. There is also one aspect which we have added, that we want an aesthetic appeal. So we develop banks and the ghats, the garden, the cycling trail around the river. So these are some of the restoration points. Now I want to highlight how much water we have. We think that water is very infinite and we are blessed with so much of water, we have so much of rain. But I want to give you a glimpse of how much water we have. Now I have this bottle which is having 100 ml of, this is a glass cleanser, lens cleaner. Its capacity is 100 ml. Now consider that you have kept the entire earth's water, contained the earth's water into this bottle of 100 ml, right? Now 97.5 ml of water is saline, that you cannot use it, right? So the fresh water is very limited, just a tiny part, that is 2.5 ml is fresh water. Out of that 2.5 ml, we cannot use the entire fresh water because some are frozen in snow caps, some are deeper into the aquifers of the groundwater, and only a tiny portion, that is 0.0075 ml, they are there in our lakes and rivers. So that means if I take 1 spoon of water, that is fresh water, and out of that only 3 drops are contained in our rivers and the in our lakes, that is the water that is flowing. Now imagine we want to contain the water into a reservoir. Now if you see Tehri Dam, It is one of the biggest and the highest and the tallest dam in India. It is about 260-meter high, and it is there on Bhagirathi River, upstream of the Ganges. The water in Tehri Dam is about 4 kilometer cube. That is, the water which is contained in the Tehri Dam is about 4 kilometer cube of water. That much water you can release. Of course, you cannot release all water. You have to release in packets so that the river is having enough water during the lean season. And so I want to say that there are reservoirs we have built on the upper stretch of the Himalayan rivers, and they are sourced to hydropower, and also they are used to release the excess water during the lean season. Now, much of water which you see downstream of Haridwar, groundwater is a major component. You can just imagine how much groundwater we withdraw from India. We are number one in the entire world. India is the world's largest withdrawer or the exploiter of groundwater. And the biggest irony is that the biggest reserve of groundwater is also beneath the Ganga plain. The greater Ganga alluvial plain is the biggest reserve of fresh water. But groundwater is also contributing to the river flow, and I can just give you one imagination that is how much water we consume from aquifer, from the groundwater every year. It is equivalent to 26 times the total storage in Bhakra Dam. So Tehri Dam is 4 kilometer cube, and the Bhakra Dam is also very large, and storage in Bhakra Dam multiply by 26. That is the amount of water we use from groundwater every year. Now, coming back to the river channel, to Ganga river, we don't see just river. As an ecologist or a hydrologist, we call it eco-hydrology. It's a branch of science which deals with the hydrology of the catchment of the basin and also looks into the ecological aspects. So we do not just look into the water. We also look at the sediments, we also look at the aquatic life, we also look at the entire connected landscapes which make the river system very unique in the entire watershed. Now, river systems, they are important links between land ecosystem and the ocean ecosystem. They connect land and the ocean, so they are running ecosystem. Now, if you cut a cross section across a river, what kind of landscape that you see? One is the main channel of the river that you see. That river is flowing, and there are low flow and the high flow. There are bank full of flows. Sometimes you see the water level is coming to the it is touching at the embankment or maybe your wall or ghat. So during the high flow season, but also there are riparian forest buffer that we always omit. If you cut a cross section, go back 100 years, and when there was no so much of development, the river was connected with always a forest, and after the forest there was a riparian wetland. So the wetland was also part or the connected landscape of the river system. Now we lost that connectivity. We lost that connectivity of the wetland with the river channel. So we want to restore the connectivity with the riparian vegetation and with wetlands. Now what is happening? You must have seen that even there is so much of rainfall and our wetlands are dry. If you go to Unnao, we have the bird sanctuary, Nawabganj Bird Sanctuary, and last year when there was extreme rain and I went and it was dry. That means that connection of the Ganga river, what it had with Nawabganj Bird Sanctuary, has been lost. The Ganga river used to flow till Unnao. If you see the landscape there, you will find so many paleo channels, so many older scars of the rivers, which you travel. If you go along the Kanpur road, you will see the scar, the paleo channels, the meandering oxbow lakes, and so we have this wetland. We also see the high flood label, that is the whenever we settle along the river, we make sure that we are not encroaching upon the terrace of the river. You know, Indian rivers are very different than rivers of Europe or anywhere else. We are having tropical monsoonal climate, and we have rainfalls, that is monsoon from June, July, August, September. During this time, the river swells manifold. So you must be having that capacity to store that excess water, sometimes 100 times than the lean season discharge. And for that, you need to store, you need to have enough land, that is the terrace, what we call, what river channel, the base that you are seeing, the base of the river is the T0, is the terrace 0. But we also have T1, T2, that is the terrace 1, terrace 2. But what is happening? We have come close to the terrace, that is T1 and T2 surface. We have encroached upon the active flood pathway of the river, and whenever there is a flood, we blame the river, we blame the climate, and we say that river is devastating. For river, it is a normal phenomenon. It is part of the hydrological cycle. Every river goes through a flood cycle and a drought cycle. But only thing is, you must respect the actual flood pathways of the river. So every river goes through a terrestrial phase, that is the land phase, and the aquatic phase, that is the wet phase. And the terrestrial phase of the river is very important. It is in the terrestrial phase, that is the dry phase, river spreads seed to the lower riparian areas. Vegetation regeneration is happening in the drought season. So even droughts are very important for the rivers. Even maximum plankton production happens during this interval of the dry phase and the wet phase. So we must understand that for Ganga river, the dry phase is very important and the wet phase is also very important. When we talk about the flow, we just do not mean the static flow. It is not just river is just like flowing. Next time, whenever you go to a river bank, just see how the flow is fluctuating across the time, that is the frequency of flow, the magnitude of the flow, and also the timing of the flow is changing. So every river has very different flow regimes. A river has multiple flow regimes. It is not very static that you maintain one flow and the river is flowing always with that particular flow. The magnitude of the flow, the frequency of the flow, and the timing of the flow is very important. So we have divided flow regimes into multiple flow regimes. Sometimes we have base flow, that is the flow contributed by the groundwater. Sometimes we have high flood pulses, that is river in the monsoon, and there is overbank flow. Suddenly there is a huge discharge is coming, maybe snow melt, there is a rapid snow melt, or there is a heavy rainfall, and there is overbank flow, and there is also subsistence flow that a river must maintain. So the multiplicity of flows are very important. The flow regimes, what we call, it is not the static regime, but the entire spectrum of flow has to be taken into totality. Now what is happening? All the projects that we see, whether it is reservoir or the dam or the barrage, they try to they try to influence these flow regimes. They do not respect the flow regimes, and they are flow generics. They structure our flow. They structures try to maintain some sort of static flow, maybe not so variable range of flows. Now let me come back to the original topic, the Ganga river. Now how do we visualize Ganga river? I'll take you to Ganga Avtaran, the descent of Ganga. Now you have seen Lord Shiva holding Ganga in his head, locks of hairs, and we say that the Ganga is descending on his head, and then it is spreading, it is coming, joining on the land and flowing and meeting the ocean. Now I look at very scientifically. I think that Shiva head is nothing but the range of mountains, and his locks of hairs are nothing but the alpine forests or the trees or even the entire pebbles and rocks through which water is passing, and it is catching the flow of the river. And on his head you find the river is getting originated. It is nothing but the glaciers. If you look around the Gangotri glacier, what is the origin? Chaukhamba peak, almost like 7,300 meter above the mean sea level, so high. And from where there's a large Gangotri glacier, and Gangotri glacier is contributing to the head stream of the Bhagirathi river, and the Bhagirathi river is joining the Alaknanda, and then the combined stream is known as the Ganga river. Now the Ganga Avtaran, when we see the coming of the Ganga, we also forget its age. Can you imagine how old this river could be? How old in fact the Himalayas could be? I want to take you back to this origin of earth. This earth came into being about 4.54 billion years back. 4.5 billion years back. And the primitive life originated around 3.5 billion years back. The first primitive form, that is blue-green alga. Before that, the nature was very anaerobic. There was no oxygen, and it was like a chemical soup. But the biochemistry started, and the first human being, from the primitive cell to the first human being, it took millions and millions of years. And the primitive Homo sapiens, which appeared in South Africa, they date back to around 200,000, that is 2 lakhs years before the current time. And what we have in Southwest Asia, we have recorded the origin of Homo sapiens to around 100,000 years back, that is 1 lakh years back. Now try to visualize the emergence of Himalaya, how the Himalaya came into being, because the story of the Ganga is linked with Himalaya. And when we say the Lord Shiva's locks are, and the head is Himalaya, and he is the Adi Deva, he is the so I consider him Rudra, and not like a personal god but like a mountain, and he is the one who is sustaining the river systems and also giving rise to so many river streams. Like if you go to Mansarovar, then so many rivers are coming from the glacial melt of the Mansarovar, right? So if you see the physiographic region of India, it can be divided into 3 parts. We have upstream, we have the Himalayan regions and the lower peninsular regions, the peninsular silt. And between peninsular India and the Himalaya, you have the Ganga basin. Now about 38 to 40 million years back, that means 4 crore years before the current time, the earth was going through extreme volatile situation, just like dance of Shiva. Volatile situation means it was time of severest phase of folding and faulting, and the Indian plate collided with Eurasian plate. Eurasia, which was part of Asia and Europe. So the Eurasian plate collided with the Indian plate almost like 35 million years back. Then with this compressive force, with this thrust folding, the Himalaya erupted. Himalaya came into being. And between this peninsular India and the Himalaya, there became a depression. There was a creation of depression, just like with the newly risen Himalaya, there was a depression. This depression between this the peninsular India and the Himalaya, the Great Ganga plain, was filled by sediments, the rocks, the pebbles, sediments. And who did that? It was done by rivers. So because of rivers, the entire gorge, the depression between the peninsular India and the Himalaya was filled by those rivers. Now you must be aware, or maybe not, the Indian monsoon system is very, very old. We have typical rainfall of June, July, August, September. June, July, August, September. Now this monsoon system is very old. It is 15 million years old. That is 1.5 crore years old. So this pattern of rainfall is happening, and this led to formation of so many rivers and and the discharge and the sediment loads coming to this to fill this great depression between the Himalaya and the peninsular India. It was also contributed by the sea level change. You know, in the last ice age, we are going through so many periods of heating and cooling, and the last ice age culminated around 12,500 years back. During that last ice age, the sea level was almost 400 feet down from what the current level is. So the river was also contributed, the carving, the incision of the river, the making of the smaller rivers by lot of change in climate, sea level change, tectonic activity, because it was earthquake which also contributed to making and the incision of the rivers. Many rivers was formed due to tectonic event, due to earthquakes. So we have a very unique fluvial morphology of Ganga plain and the delta. Now I want to ask you, what is unique about Ganga? What makes the Ganga different from other rivers? Why Ganga Jal is so important? Why do we keep Ganga Jal in our home? Why not other rivers? Do you know that Ganga river has contributed to making of this great Ganga plain, which is the largest flat fluvial fertile land in the entire world? Nowhere you will see this kind of largest flat land, say from Haridwar to, you know, like almost going to the end of the Ganga alluvial plain. The flat land, it was made by rivers, Ganga river, and the thickness of that alluvial land could be 4.5 kilometer, even more, sometimes even 10 kilometer of alluvial. You find, if you make a drill, you find the thickness of the alluvial is so high, and that was done by the Ganga river year by year, carrying sediment loads, depositing. So Ganga river is not just like 1,000 years old. It could be even a million. But many people say that it came into current shape in late Quaternary period. That is, it could be about end of late Quaternary, or even some people are saying that we have this Miocene epoch, the late Miocene epoch, which was about 23 million years to 5 million years. So the formation of the Ganga foreland basin happened in the late Miocene epoch. So it is very old. So we must respect the river systems and all the connected tributaries, that they are geoheritage. They are not just made by human beings. They are not canals that you just cut across from anywhere. Now the second unique thing about Ganga is the source of making of the biggest freshwater delta of this world. You know where this biggest freshwater delta? The Sundarbans and the Bangladesh. If you see that entire span of Sundarban, the freshwater delta, the area is 1,40,000 hectare. That Sundarban delta was made by Ganga river. So imagine, this river is so unique. It connects Himalayan glaciers right from the Gangotri and go upstream to Chokamba peaks, to traveling to Bay of Bengal, to Sundarbans. And if you go to Sundarbans, you'll find a lot of tiny tidal waterways and the mud flats. The mud flats which was made by the sediment, the finer sediment which was carried all the way from Himalayas to the Sundarban. The sediment was carried by the Ganga river, and that mud flat, that waterways became home to so many species of flora and fauna, rich biome. So the Ganga river is connecting two major biome of this world, the Gangotri glacier and the Sundarban delta. This is unique thing about Ganga. Third unique thing about Ganga, the Ganga Jal. You know, British, when they were going back home, whenever they used to travel, they used to carry Ganga Jal in large vessel, copper vessel and silver vessel, and the journey used to take sometimes days, months, and the Ganga Jal would not deteriorate. It will not show any sign of decay. Why it was happening? So there was this British physician, Ernest Hankin. He was one of the pioneer persons who did research on Ganga river. And later they kept on walking, what is the unique about Ganga? And there was one scientist called Felix de Herelle. Felix de Herelle, for the first time, showed that the Ganga water could have the bacteriophage, a primitive virus, a primitive form of virus or the bacteriophage which kills other bacteria. And that led to the self-purification capacity of the Ganga. The Ganga water would not deteriorate, would not show any sign of decay because it has a lot of bacteriophage. And later, Dr. D.S. Bhargava in 1980s, he documented that Ganga water has a unique property of self-purification. It can hold oxygen for long time. That is, the re-aeration and the aeration capacity of the Ganga water was comparatively far better than the other rivers. So it could contain a lot of dissolved oxygen, it could contain the minerals, and that was very unique. Now, the fourth unique thing that I consider is the entire terrain, the topography of the Ganga river. Topography, if you see the upper Ganga and the lower Ganga and the middle Ganga, there is so much of difference in the terrain and topography. Imagine Gangotri Glacier, the head stream. What is the elevation? It is somewhere about 4,300 meters above the sea level, and Haridwar is about 340 meters. So between Gangotri and that is Gomukh and Haridwar, there is an elevation difference of almost like more than 4,000 meters, about 4,100 meters. And so much of elevation difference the river has to do in less than 300 kilometers. That means the river would make very incised valley because of the flow velocity, because of the slope, because of the terrain. The rapid flows, the waterfalls would be very high compared to other rivers because it has to travel a small distance with so much difference in the slope, in the terrain. And that is unique about Ganga, because after Haridwar it enters into the plain and it loses energy because so much of energy is contained in its water because of the slope. So I told you about 5 major properties about Ganga. Let us move forward about Ganga basin. How large is the Ganga basin and what is unique about Ganga basin? Now Ganga basin is also part of it's a larger sub basin of Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna basin. We call it GBM, Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna basin. And Ganga basin is part of GBM, that is Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna, and the entire GBM could be 1.7 million square kilometer. It is so huge area because it is not only India but also Nepal, Bangladesh and China. Now out of that, 80% of the basin falls in India. That is the Ganga basin. 80% of the Ganga basin is in India, 4% is in China, 15% in Nepal and about 1% in Bangladesh. So out of 1.7 million square kilometer, about 8,60,000 square kilometer of the basin area is in Ganga, and that basin supports about 450 million people. That is, Ganga basin supports about more than 450 million people. So that means almost like little half than India's population is being supported by this fertile Ganga plain. And this Ganga basin contributes to 40% of India's GDP, right? 40% of India's GDP is contributed by the Ganga basin itself. So because of fertile land and because of irrigation potential, we have massive irrigation network. In UP alone, we have 74,000 kilometers of canal network, and that supports about 57% of the India's total net irrigated area. So much of irrigated area is in Ganga basin. Now this Ganga basin, there are many rivers, almost like 20 large and small rivers. They contribute to the flow of the rivers. So when we make the basin map, we also make the map of those 20 river basins, smaller river basins. For example, the Yamuna is there, the Ramganga is there, Gomti is there, Kosi, Ghagra, Gandak, and so many rivers are there which contribute to the flow of the river. Now I would ask you, which rivers contribute in a very massive way? You know, there are many rivers coming from Nepal, that is the Tibet, the Himalayan glaciers from the Tibet side coming through Nepal, and ultimately it is meeting the Ganga river. Now take the example of the Ghagra river, the Gandak and the Kosi river. They contribute heavy flow. Even the Yamuna river is there, but the flow contributed by the Ghagra river is very high, followed by Yamuna river, and then we have Gandak river, and then we have Kosi river. They bring a lot of fresh water into the channel, into the river system. So that's why we don't have problem of flow downstream of Allahabad. Upstream of Allahabad, there's a problem of flow in the lean season, but downstream, because of so many rivers, the river is having good amount of water. Now, what contributes to the water into the river? Now, it is not just snow melt. You must be thinking it is a snow melt river, so all the water is coming from Gangotri glacier. No. In fact, just 1/4 of the water. Other water from the rainfall and from groundwater. It is the groundwater which is contributing to the peninsular rivers, to the plain-fed rivers, and they are coming to the Ganga river. For example, Ken, Betwa, Chambal, they are all groundwater-fed rivers. They also get rainfall, but these plateau rivers, these plain-fed rivers, they contribute to the flow of the river. So the snow melt is one component which could be just about if we take the Nepal river, if they take the rivers from the Tibet, from the Nepal side, then the flow from the snow melt could be 60%, and 40% from this groundwater and the other plateau rivers. Now come back to the course of the river, how the river is flowing. I gave you the idea about the upstream of the river. Now go to the upper catchment, that is your Bhagirathi and Alaknanda, which meet at Devprayag. What is the main stream? What is the source stream of the river? You know, we recognize even in the mythology, even in our textbooks, we consider that Bhagirathi is the source stream of the river, because Gangotri glacier contributes to the Gomukh, and from Gomukh 18 km downstream we have Gangotri temple, or the Gangotri. There is a small township from the mouth of the glacier, the Gomukh. But if you go upstream of the Gomukh, about 35 km upstream, the Chaukhamba peak and the entire Gangotri glacier, which is about 30 km from the from the origin, from the Gomukh upstream, and the thickness of the glacier could be somewhere around, maybe mean thickness could be about 200 meter, and the width of that glacier could be from anywhere from half a meter to 3 meter. So that kind of glacier is there, and the glacier melt is contributing to the discharge of the Bhagirathi river. That Bhagirathi river is having a lot of potential, lot of hydropower potential, and that's why we have so much of hydropower plant. That Bhagirathi river is about 205 kilometer long, right? From Gomukh to Devprayag, it travels almost like 210 kilometers of journey, and the water, the amount of mean water could be similar to what we take from the upper Ganga canal, that is in Haridwar. In Haridwar, we take major portion of water to the upper Ganga canal. That much water is contained in Bhagirathi river. So Bhagirathi river flow is about 257 meter cube per second of water from the Gangotri glacier melt. and it comes to Dev-Prayag, like after from Maneri we have hydroelectric plant, we have Tehri where Tehri Dam is there on Bhagirathi river, and then it is coming down to meet the Alaknanda river at Dev-Prayag. Now Alaknanda hydrologically is the main stream or the source stream of the Ganga. Bhagirathi is there, but the flow of Alaknanda is almost double than the flow of the Bhagirathi river. Alaknanda river is contributed by 5 different rivers. That's why we have Panch Prayag. Whenever there is a river meeting with a Ganga river is meeting with some river, we call it Prayag. That is meeting of 2 rivers. Now we have Panch Prayag. The Alaknanda river is fed by 5 rivers which are bringing a lot of fresh water from the glacier melt. For example, we have first of all we have Nandakni river, which is meeting at Vishnu Prayag. Then you have Pindar river, Pindar which is meeting at Pindar is meeting at Karn Prayag, and Mandakni river is meeting at Rudra Prayag, and Bhagirathi is meeting at Dev Prayag. So these 5 Panch Prayag, the 5 rivers are contributing to the combined flow of Alaknanda river, and that's why this combined stream at Dev Prayag, you must have seen one water is bluish, one water is little bit muddy water. They meet and merge at Dev Prayag, and this combined stream is known as the Ganga river. That is the upper stretch. So upper stretch of the Ganga river is characterized by high bed slopes, waterfalls, and narrow gorges. Sometimes the channel of the river is very narrow, and the river descends further, from Dev Prayag it comes to Rishikesh, from Rishikesh to Haridwar, and from Haridwar it enters the plain, that is from it comes to Bijnor and Narora, and you have Farrukhabad, Kannauj, Kanpur, and then you have Allahabad and Varanasi, and from Varanasi onwards it goes to Bihar, and then after West Bengal, and West Bengal then it enters into the Bay of Bengal. Now there are many urban centers located around the main channel of the river. If you see the boundary of the UP and Bihar, river Ganga makes the natural boundary. River, whatever we administrative boundary we have made on the national map, they are not the boundary of the river basins, but the Ganga river makes a natural boundary between UP and Bihar. Almost like 100 kilometers of the boundary is made by the Ganga river, and it travels almost like 1100 kilometers in UP and about 405 kilometers in Bihar, and the 5 states, that is Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand and West Bengal, they make the major share of the Ganga basin. Now from the hydrological perspective, we divide the river into 4 segments, that is upstream from Gomukh to Haridwar, then from Haridwar to Allahabad, then from Allahabad to Farakka, and from Farakka to Bay of Bengal. Now flow between the stretch, that is Allahabad to Farakka, the flow is 6 to 7 times more than the flow between Haridwar to Allahabad. So Haridwar to Allahabad region could be flow constrained region. The flow is some issue, but after Allahabad the flow becomes very high because of the contribution of the rivers coming from the other side, that is from Nepal. Now where is the problem? The problem stretch in terms of the heavy pollution load is the stretch between Kanpur and Varanasi. The Kanpur and Varanasi stretch is very polluted. Sometimes the water becomes almost like it is not even suitable for bathing. It is not just suitable for wildlife, maintenance of the wildlife and navigation. Otherwise, rest of the stretch, they are somewhat suitable for bathing standards. That is, you can take bath. except some critical stretches are there where quality is a problem because of fecal coliform. Otherwise, from upstream, that is Gomukh to Haridwar, quality is not a major issue. Only in certain season you have certain fecal coliform is more than desirable, but rest of the time you can take bath. River is bathing standard. You can even drink water with conventional treatment, that is after disinfection. We call it quality A, and the bathing is quality B, and for nurturing wildlife is C, and the rest like for irrigation D water, and E is not even suitable for irrigation. So there are many diversions because of irrigation. That is a problem. Now let us come back to, I gave you the structure, a little bit about the idea about the basin, the idea about the topography and the terrain, and why Ganga water is unique. Now diversion project, that is water allocation to canal, is very, very high. How much water we withdraw daily from the Ganga river is very, very it is very important to know from the point of maintenance of the flow regime. Just at Haridwar we have Bhimgora Barrage. Bhimgora Barrage, it was made by Britishers way back, like they started in 1842 and they completed in 1852. So it's very old barrage. It was meant for irrigation because there was huge drought and famine problem in western Uttar Pradesh. People were dying of hunger, and Roorkee Engineering College came into being, and the British, they set up this institute, what we call IIT Roorkee, and they designed this Bhimgora Barrage to take water from Ganga river at Haridwar. That time the design capacity was almost like 600 cubic feet per second. Now right now we have more than 10,000 cubic feet per second, that is about 297 meter cube per second, cumex, we call it cumex, 297 cumex that we withdraw from the Bhimgora Barrage itself. That diversion, that allocation is even higher than what is flowing in Bhagirathi river. Remember I told you the discharge of Bhagirathi river is about 200, average discharge is about 257 cumex. But Narora, this Bhimgora Barrage is diverting about 297 cumex of water. And on the other side is also Eastern Ganga Canal, that is diverting around 140 or 141 cumex. So together these two barrages, the Upper Ganga Canal and the Eastern Ganga Canal at Haridwar, they divert around 50%, sometimes even more in this lean season, of the actual water. The Bhagirathi water, the Alaknanda water which is coming from Dev Prayag, 50% of the flow is being diverted from these two canals. Right now they are supporting more than 1 lakh hectare of the land, this massive canal system. And if you take the UP alone, in Uttar Pradesh, the length of canal is about 74,000 kilometers. 74,000 kilometers of canal, they are dependent upon the canal systems of the Upper Ganga Canal. And the Eastern Ganga Canal, they also feed for our drinking water, even to our NCR region. Delhi is also getting Ganga water. Now come little down from Bhimgora Barrage to the Middle Ganga Canal or the Madhya Ganga Canal. At Bijnor, we have created Madhya Ganga Canal at Bijnor. This Madhya Ganga Canal diverts about 115 cumex of water, again for irrigation. And if you further come down, you have the Lower Ganga Canal at Narora. Narora, near Bulandshahr, there is a Lower Ganga Canal, and that further diverts about 156 cumex, that is meter cube per second. So 156 cumex of water is being diverted at Narora. So imagine in a less span, in a small span, right from Bhimgora Barrage at Haridwar, the Upper Ganga Canal, the Eastern Ganga Canal, then you have Madhya Ganga Canal at Bijnor, and the Lower Ganga Canal at Narora. They divert a massive amount of water from the main channel of the river. If you add it, it would be somewhere around 920 cumex about 900 cumex meter cube per second of water is being diverted by these canals. Now the question emerges, what we can do to stop this allocation of water? Why we have over allocated water? I always tell, if I take so much of blood from you, would you be able to survive, do the normal functions, the live blood? But what we can do? It was done by British people, the Upper Ganga Canal, but we kept on adding the canals after canals and over allocated the entire fresh water, and that is impacting the minimum flow into the river. I can give you one example. This Ganga river is a national river. You know, it was declared a national river in 2009. And there was also we have Gangetic dolphins. Gangetic dolphins are very unique to Ganga river systems. Earlier it used to be there throughout the Ganga river, right from Bay of Bengal stretch to Haridwar. Gangetic dolphins used to be there. There are records of Gangetic dolphins. But when we created these obstructions and the barrage, it hampered the natural navigation or the migration or spawning of dolphins. And the dolphins were confined to these pockets, that is from Bhimgora barrage to your middle barrage, that is Bhimgora to Narora, and then Bhimgora to Bijnor, and then Bijnor to Narora, and Narora to Kanpur barrage. We have also a barrage at Kanpur which is meant to supply water and also to maintain the water level in the Ganga river. So these 3-4 barrages, they have created the obstruction or the fragmentation in the habitat of the Ganga river, and many species of the fish, the gharial, the Gangetic gharials are highly endangered species, critically endangered Gangetic gharial. The dolphins, their numbers are even less than 3,000. They are there in some other river systems also, but in Ganga main channel, their population could be even less than 2,500 because of these obstructions we have created. Now they are in the lower stream of the river between Narora and Kanpur. There are some populations, but their numbers are well below 100. So what are the major pain areas? I would say first important thing is the water allocation, how we could reduce the allocation from the main channel, whatever water is being abstracted from the canal system, how we can lessen the burden. I know cultivation is very important because 56% of the total irrigated area is from the Ganga basin, and the 40% of the GDP is coming from the Ganga basin. So we cannot compromise on our agricultural productivity. But we also want to see our rivers, our Ganga river, free flowing, that is Abiral, Nirmal. We also want to restore the ecological sanctity. We also want to restore the hydrological and geological sanctity. So the first thing that we can do is to design precision irrigation system, that is reduce the demand on the canal and release more water into the river so that river could perform the minimum ecological functions. You know, every river has to perform minimum some level of ecological functions, and we define the self-cleansing or self-purification capacity of the river, which is a highly non-linear function. We cannot just design or decide about the self-purification just like canal. We design the canal, the design of the canal is very simple. Even the left bank and the right bank are same. But if you see a river, the right bank is different from the left bank. Very, very different. Hydrologically, geologically, and even ecologically they are different, because they are the source to habitat, different sorts of bank habitat, bank vegetation. The right bank could be different from the left bank, but most of the projects, they treat river banks as the same, left and right, and we try to kind of normalize, generalize these banks, right? So I was talking on the allocation. Even if you could reduce 50% demand on the allocation to canals, that means river would get sufficient water to maintain its salinity, to maintain its minimum environmental flows downstream of Haridwar. Now upstream flows are some problem due to dams and reservoirs. Hydropower dams are there. The numbers are huge. If I give you one example, Bhagirathi River, there are now 18 dams either in operation or under construction or planned. Total 18 hydropower dams are being planned on Bhagirathi River, and about 37 hydroelectric dams are either in operation or under preparation or even planned. 23 hydropower projects are planned at Alaknanda stream, that is Alaknanda part of the head stream. So 37 hydropower plants on Alaknanda and about 18 hydropower plants on Bhagirathi, they would compromise the flows. And if you see the data of last year, there were some stretches where there was no water. The Ganga was barren in certain states. Bhagirathi was barren because of certain diversions. So that will impact the Gangatva, the bacteriophage, the quality, the cell purification capacity of the water. So two things I want to highlight. Hydropower is important, but hydropower is no more a clean environmental source of energy, clean source of power. You could have solar power. Right now, the total power generation in the Ganga from the Ganga system is about 5,000 megawatt. Tehri Dam is giving you 1,000 megawatt. Of course, another 1,000 megawatt is coming from the storage of the Tehri Dam. So total design capacity is 2,000 megawatt. 2,000 megawatt from the Tehri Dam, and there are other, Vishnu Pali Maneri, and there is one plant at Vishnu Prayag. So there are many hydro. I don't want to go into those controversies, but what I want to say that try to think of the other option, because these are landscape, these are heritage sites. The upper Ganga stretch is heritage from the point of ecology, very fragile ecological area, and also geologically Himalayas are still active. It is youngest sort of, still evolving. The faults and the earthquakes are still happening, and these hydropower may not be a safe option. So what we can do, I can give you one example that along the river in UP alone, if you take both the bank of the river, 2,000 kilometer, 1,000 kilometer this side, 1,000 kilometer this side, 2,000 kilometer of river banks you have. Why don't you develop solar power, solar panels in lieu of hydropower? Right? So you can minimize the damage. One is allocation, one is hydropower, and of course the reservoir and the dams are creating harmful impact. But when I gave you the example of development paradox, we cannot maintain the complete natural environment, right? Right now we are in a built landscape, so we have to make a kind of compromising situation. Maybe our desirable goal is to make this river navigable, fishable, swimmable, drinkable all the time throughout the year. But we have created so many structures, so many barrages, so many dams that it will be difficult to restore the flow. But we have not crossed the tipping point. There is a hope, and the government is doing much. I am very happy to share that Namami Ganga, National Mission on Clean Ganga, have added the ecological sanctity and the geological sanctity. Earlier they were just focusing on clean Ganga, Aviral Ganga, Nirmal Ganga. But from the last 2 years, they are focusing on ecological sanctity also and the geological sanctity also, which is a good thing. And I always say, do not blame government all the time. Who makes the government? Who makes the policy? Some of us would become ministers, some of us would become bureaucrats, and we make the faulty planning, we make the policy which would impact our natural endowments, right? So they are also facing constraints of energy, power, irrigation, cultivation, yield. So much of pressure is there from the economic point of view. But also as an ecologist, we want to see our rivers flowing with aquatic life, rivers with doing all the functions of sediments, like fluvial connectivity that I gave you, I talked about in the beginning, that the river must be connected with its landscapes, that is the wetlands and the water bodies. Now coming back to river restoration, how do we restore the river? This is my job. I work with a lot of small and large rivers, and we are trying to restore rivers through many measures. First of all, we try to restore the flow, the natural flow in the river. Flow is a master variable. Magnitude of the flow, timing of the flow, and the frequency of the flow. Flow is a master variable. If you work with the flow, try to bring in more fresh water through reducing canal allocation, through increasing the groundwater table. If you increase it through recharge schemes, through natural structures, no need to make artificial. There are natural structures made by the nature throughout the Ganga plain, many lakes, ponds, wetlands. If you restore, rejuvenate those structures, there would be enough capacity to store rainwater, and that will contribute to the normalization of the groundwater table, the shallow water table, and the river would also gain from the groundwater. So second, apart from reducing the burden from the allocation point of view, we try to restore the groundwater. Now I don't know how much time we have almost like 2 o'clock there, so I have so many things to say, but because of the time constraints, I want to conclude here. What is our objective? Why we are working on this river systems? Why Ganga is unique? I want to say that Ganga is not just like any other river. You just don't see the channel. You see water in totality, water connected with the landscape, water connected with the aquifers, with the groundwaters. And I was looking for the meaning of the Ganga, and I met a saint in Haridwar. He's a scholar, and he told me the meaning of Ganga. He said Ganga word has been made by Gang 2 times. Gang dhatu has been used, and the Ganga, Gang means to flow, and Gang means to flow. That means to flow, and to flow has been used twice. A river has to flow unobstructed to maintain its fluvial regimes, to maintain its fluvial connectivity, and to perform all the actions of the rivers. In the past, many restoration activities have failed because we are still working on the reach scale, on a small scale. We have to work on the basin scale. We have to start from a small river, from even a tiny streams, and go back to the main channel. So the restoration work has to start from the small stream, and it has to go to the larger stream. So I wish you a very we are going through this global pandemic. We are all home. Our biological clocks are disturbed, and we don't have any sense of time and days. So I hope you enjoyed my lecture. If you have any question, you can put in your comment box, and I would be happy to respond. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you once again.